More Ramadan violence as suicide blasts hit several cities, including the holy city of Medina. How Kenyan student engineers are innovating to save lives. And why is it last call for so many British nightclubs? Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening, I'm Esther Gido. Vincent Makori is off today. This is Africa 54. Residents in Saudi Arabia remained shaken on Tuesday, one day after suicide bombings hit several cities, including one in the holy city of Medina that killed 4 people and wounded 5 others. The Medina blast happened at a checkpoint outside one of Islam's holiest sites, the Prophet's Mosque, where the Prophet Muhammad is buried. The Saudi Interior Ministry says the attacker blew himself up after being confronted by security officers. The mosque was busy Monday as Muslims prepare to mark the end of holy month of Ramadan this week. Authorities are also investigating a suicide bombing at a Shiite mosque in the eastern city of Qatif. The Interior Ministry says parts of 3 bodies were found but had not been identified. The first bombing Monday happened near the U.S. consulate in the western city of Jeddah. 2 police officers had minor injuries. The Nigerian military says its soldiers repelled an attack Tuesday by 3 female suicide bombers from the Boko Haram terrorist group, fatally shooting 2 as they tried to detonate their explosives near displaced people who have fled their homes because of fighting. A Nigerian colonel says 2 civilians were injured in the attack that occurred on the outskirts of Munguno town in northeast Nigeria. The Nigerian military also reported that it killed 4 suspected Boko Haram members in an ambush early Tuesday in the Kukawa area of the country's northeast. Meanwhile, in southern Nigeria, authorities say suspected militants from the Niger Delta Avengers Group late Monday blew up 2 pipelines belonging to the state oil company and U.S.-based company Chevron. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is on a 4-nation tour of Africa. Netanyahu arrived in Kenya Tuesday and was received by Kenya's President Uhuru Kenyatta. A detachment from the Kenya Air Force greeted him in the capital, Nairobi, where he inspected a guard of honor. The Israeli Prime Minister visited Uganda on Monday. He says his trip is about rebuilding ties with Africa.
Israel is coming back to Africa, and Africa is coming back to Israel. We believe you have the same potential. We believe that Africa is a continent on the rise, and the rising tide will help everyone. A rising tide lifts all ships. And working together, we all stand to benefit. And people, citizens of Kenya who are listening to this, should know that the practical result of our cooperation can be greater prosperity and greater security for each and every one of them.
Speaking at a joint press conference at State House, Nairobi, Kenya's President Uhuru Kenyatta says Africa's single most important challenge is insecurity.
We need to partner with each other. We need to be able to deal with the security threats that we have together. And we believe that there is need for us as a continent to once again begin re-engaging Israel on a more positive basis, with an understanding that our partnership can help make this world that much more secure. And this is something that Kenya will continue to push to see how Israel can regain her observer position at the African Union. We can't be able to achieve the kind of growth rates, the kind of development that we seek for our people unless we can secure our nations. So it would be foolhardy for one to sit back and say that faced with those challenges, that Kenya, that Africa cannot engage Israel in this particular issue. That is like an ostrich burying its head in the sand.
Mr. Netanyahu's next stops are in Rwanda and Ethiopia. But as we have mentioned, he started his East African tour on Monday in Uganda. Netanyahu spoke at a ceremony marking the 30th anniversary of Operation Entebbe, in which Israeli commandos rescued hostages from Uganda's Entebbe International Airport after an Air France flight was hijacked by Palestinian militants. The operation ended with 45 Ugandan casualties and 1 Israeli casualty, the older brother of Prime Minister Netanyahu.
We have gathered here to mark an event that inspired the world and lifted the spirits of my people. At Entebbe, international terrorism suffered a stinging defeat. The rescue mission proved that good can prevail over evil, that hope can triumph over evil, over fear. Today, savage terror is once again sweeping the world. We must recognize that the battle against it is indivisible. When terrorism succeeds in one place, it spreads to other places. And when terrorism is defeated anywhere, it is weakened everywhere. This is why Entebbe was more than an Israeli victory. It was a victory for all humanity in the fight against those who threaten our common civilization.
During the June 1976 hijacking, the airplane was flown to Entebbe. Then President of Uganda, Idi Amin, threw his support behind the hijackers. However, the standoff came to an end on the night of July 4th when Israeli commandos stormed the airport and rescued 102 hostages. Later Monday, Netanyahu met with African leaders in Uganda's capital, Kampala, at a summit focusing on security and the fight against Islamic extremism. The event in Uganda was marred by controversy when Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni repeatedly referred to Israel as Palestine during his speech. Ofono Opondo, a spokesperson with the Ugandan government, quickly tweeted out a defense of the Israel-Palestine mix-up, saying that the whole of that land was originally known as Palestine, so Museveni's reference isn't wrong. The Prime Minister later traveled to Kenya and is scheduled to visit Rwanda and Ethiopia during his tour, in which he is expected to discuss issues of regional investment and security. After Britain voted to leave the European Union, Brussels fears other members such as the Netherlands could leave the bloc. In the Netherlands, just as in Britain, there are big concerns over immigration and sovereignty. But supporters of the EU cite vital role the bloc plays in the country's prosperity at the heart of the single market. Henry Ridgwell reports from Rotterdam.
Maastricht, deep in the south of the Netherlands, where the barge and the bicycle are the best ways to get around. The town's name is associated with the 1992 treaty that created the modern European Union.
The treaty that was signed in this building 24 years ago set Europe onto the path of ever closer political and monetary union. But now Maastricht finds itself in the Netherlands' most Eurosceptic region.
Recent polls show half of Dutch voters want a referendum on EU membership.
As a nation state, we should have our own borders, our own courts, and to make our own laws, and not the people in Brussels or the European Union.
Stassen used to be a member of the far-right Freedom Party, led by Geert Wilders, which currently tops opinion polls. Wilders has campaigned against what he calls the Islamisation of Europe and has demanded that the Dutch, like the British, vote on EU membership.
Brexit is all about getting the sovereignty back. But, however, there are a lot of concerns about immigration.
Follow the barges downriver and you reach Rotterdam, Europe's biggest port. It handles 465 million tonnes of cargo every year, connecting the powerhouse economies of Northern Europe with the rest of the world.
Much of the prosperity, both in the Netherlands and Europe as a whole, that we've gained over the last decades depends on the free trade of movement, of goods, of people.
Here, an EU exit is seen as an economic disaster.
With Europe, we are 500 million people, the largest trading zone, the largest market by itself, and the Netherlands as a country is only 16 million people.
EU supporters are dismayed over Britain's vote to leave.
The United Kingdom are a major trading partner for the Netherlands. There are big historic ties.
But there are common concerns about the EU across Europe.
The basic sentiment being Brussels is regulating too much. And the other side of the story being that Brussels, that the European Union, that the European decision-making processes are far too removed from the citizens.
Dutch law makes a referendum on EU membership unlikely for now, but with elections due by March next year, contagion from so-called Brexit could be felt first in the Netherlands, one of the Union's founding members. Henry Ridgewell for VOA News, Rotterdam in the Netherlands.
A NASA solar-powered spacecraft has begun orbiting Jupiter after a 5-year, 2.8 billion kilometer journey.
The U.S. space agency NASA's probe Juno fired its engine late Monday night to slow down just enough for it to be captured by Jupiter's gravitational pull. Mission controllers at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory in California erupted in cheers after receiving signals indicating the successful end of the 35-minute maneuver.
I mean, it's overwhelming. The team, the amount of time and effort everyone put into this, and the risks that were overcome, it's amazing. I mean, the more you know about the mission, you know just how tricky this was, and to have it be flawless, I mean, I really can't put it into words.
Juno will now spend the next 20 months studying the gas giant, the fifth planet from the Sun and the biggest in our solar system, in order to help scientists determine the foundations of our solar system and to search for signs of a solid surface beneath its cloud-covered atmosphere. Juno is the second spacecraft to reach Jupiter. NASA's Galileo probe circled the planet from 1995 to 2003. Juno's mission will end in 2018, when it will deliberately plunge into Jupiter's atmosphere and disintegrate.
We want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54, and check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Coming up, Kenyan students innovate to find solutions to tough health issues. Stay with us.
This is Green Beat for a healthier planet.
Endangered animals make the news nearly every week, but it's rare to hear about an endangered plant. Now, London's Royal Botanic Gardens reports more than 20% of the world's wild plants are threatened.
There are very, very few areas currently that are recognised for the important plants that they contain. Most of our conservation areas are important bird areas, for example, and we really do need to change that round, given how fundamental plants are to human well-being.
That's Kathy J. Willis of the Royal Botanic Gardens, which has produced a new report called The State of the World's Plants.
I think on the positive, we're still discovering a lot of new plants, 2,000 new plant species a year on average, and we're finding new plants for food, for fuel, for drugs.
Scientists at the Royal Botanic Gardens study only a fraction of the world's more than 390,000 known plants, including a native Rwandan water lily, which is already extinct in the wild. I'm VOA's Rebecca Ward for Green Beat.
My name's Carla Babb, and I work the Pentagon Beat. That access helps me to do better stories. Every day it's my responsibility to collect all of the defense news. It keeps our VOA viewers informed. I get to travel all across the globe. Anything that's defense related and how to protect and keep people safe, that's where I'll go. So it's never a dull moment at the Pentagon. My name is Carla Babb. This is my beat.
Now to our health segment. In Kenya, an initiative called the Maker Movement at the University of Nairobi set out nearly 2 years ago to design effective, low-cost, locally sourced medical equipment that can improve maternal, infant and child health. Lenny Ruvaga takes us inside the lab to see what it accomplished.
It took Joel Kabete and his classmates 2 years to design this suction machine. The device is used to clear an infant's airways after birth or during an operation. Kenya has to import much of its medical equipment. Conventional suction machines go for around $2,000, but this one cost just $500 to make with a 3D printer.
We use the local materials, we use the designs ourselves, we design the things ourselves, and also this will come this should come up as a wake-up call. We can use the materials that we have now and come up with substances that can help not only the children, but the society as a whole.
Student Rafael Osoro is the brain behind this phototherapy machine. It took him 6 months to develop. The blue spectrum light emitted by the machine reduces the high bilirubin levels that cause jaundice in newborns. Osoro notes that his machine is 1/3 of the cost of other similar machines on the market, and it is adapted for local needs.
When it comes to the hospitals, 1 unit should be used for 1 baby. But when you go to, for instance, Kenyatta National Hospital, they are putting 3 babies on 1 unit. And the lighting is not effective, so we had to incorporate the size of around 4 babies and then come up with this size.
The Science and Technology Park of the University of Nairobi partnered with Concern Worldwide and Kenyatta National Hospital to develop the prototypes. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is funding the project. But you may be noticing something about the people in this story. There are no women.
We have a problem in that we've got a lot of innovations that go on, but we don't get enough women in science, we don't get enough women in technology, and also women in engineering coming through. And a lot of the problems that we have in society are because of gender imbalances.
The suction machine is already before the Kenya Bureau of Standards, which will decide if it can be approved for use. But there may be more challenges ahead.
We don't have the ready-made policy to support the research and innovation of medical devices. We are having challenges with ensuring that the highly skilled manpower are focused on innovating around medical devices.
The student engineers are optimistic, and they are already working on more designs. Lenny Ruvaga for VOA News, Nairobi.
The International AIDS Conference starts on July 18th in Durban, South Africa, and perhaps the greatest achievement in the fight against HIV/AIDS is that it's no longer a death sentence. Instead, it can be a chronic, manageable disease if people get treatment. VOA's Carol Pearson has more.
People get tested for HIV for a number of reasons. It's a simple test, and they can know the results in just 5 minutes.
For me, it's very important to do an HIV test because we take care of our family and friends. Because if you don't know, how would you know if you're infecting a loved one?
It's important because one never knows what's going on with their partner or ex-partner.
HIV/AIDS is both treatable and preventable. People who have the virus can live normal lives as long as they stay on treatment. In most segments of U.S. society, the number of AIDS cases has gone down, according to the Centers for Disease Control's director, Dr. Tom Frieden. Frieden spoke to VOA by Skype.
We've seen huge decreases in heterosexual transmission, more than 2/3, 80% reductions generally. We've seen huge decreases in injection drug use as a cause of transmission. But among young men who have sex with men, we've seen increases in HIV infection.
Groups that are most at risk are Hispanics and African Americans.
Women of childbearing age and young Black, gay, and bisexual men seem to be most at risk for HIV and for new cases of HIV infection. And then when we look at who progresses from HIV onto AIDS, again, Blacks and Latinos are most at risk for that.
Nova Salud teaches people how to avoid getting HIV/AIDS, and it helps those who have it.
The first thing we do is we acknowledge that there is stigma.
Stigma gets in the way of treatment everywhere in the world. Experts say testing has to become routine.
If you go to the doctor to get your blood work for cholesterol, for high blood pressure, why not start including HIV and STDs?
The goal everywhere is to get to the point where 90% of those with HIV know it, and 90% of those who are positive get treatment. And finally, 90% of those in treatment reduce the virus in their blood to undetectable levels. The theory is that this will end the AIDS epidemic as a global public health threat by 2030. Carol Pearson, VOA News, Washington.
It's time now for a short break. Still to come on Africa 54. Why is it closing time for so many British nightclubs? We'll be right back.
Okay, is 25 million.
Welcome back to Africa 54. Here's what's trending. Another day, another innovative use for 3D printing. The Israeli Air Force has turned to the cutting-edge technology to be able to salvage old planes. When repaired, they can still be of valuable use to the military. The 3D printer creates an array of parts from battery casings to motor body tail connectors for helicopters. The parts are printed in polymer plastics as well as metal. The engineers use a 3D camera to scan the part they need. The scan of the item can then be seen on a computer screen and is then sent to the 3D printer so the part can take shape. The military says the new technology allows it to save costs by avoiding pricey manufacturing expenses. Next up, for viewers of a certain age, a sad trend out of the UK. Almost half of the country's famed nightclubs have closed since 2005, according to the Association of Licensed Multiple Retailers, for multiple reasons. As large parts of cities are gentrified, clubs and music venues are vulnerable. They are often seen by people who don't use them as public nuisance. Instead, offices and residential areas and the income generated from building and selling them takes precedence. Local councils are not approving a license to stay open for longer hours, making operating impossible because of the costs. Other factors are timid economy, changing public tastes, bars opening later, and dating apps. And finally, New York is a city that prides itself on eateries that cater to every palate. So why not the American breakfast staple, cold cereal? Kellogg, the maker of Frosted Flakes and Rice Krispies, has opened its first cereal cafe in Times Square. A bowl of cereal at the cafe will cost anywhere between $6.50 and $7.50 and can be eaten or taken out. The cafe is part of a push by Kellogg to reinvigorate U.S. cereal sales that have declined as consumers choose healthier foods over sugary and processed products. Celebrity chefs provided the Kellogg's Cafe with new gourmet recipes to revive cereal's somewhat soggy status. There are plans to launch a delivery service later in the year, and that's what's trending today. The Smithsonian Museum of African Art has commissioned an artist from Africa to do a sound installation which is unique to the museum and cannot be heard anywhere else in the world. Here's VOA's Caroline Turner.
Market Symphony is an original work of sound art commissioned by the Smithsonian National Museum of African Art. Artist Emeka Agbo created the installation specifically for the gallery by drawing on the sound of commercial cries and urban ambience of Balagun, a sprawling open-air market in Lagos, Africa's largest and most populated city. Curator Karen Milbourne explains the original commission.
And I was particularly curious because I think I'm interested in how we could tell the narratives of art history differently if we thought about geography differently. And what if we thought of the history of sound art in relationship to Africa? So I became curious about, well, what about South Africa's sound artists? And as I was sort of thinking these things through, I encountered Emeka Ogbo. And so as soon as I met him, he's so talented and so interesting in how he thinks about space and sound that I thought, well, I just want to work with him. And so we invited him to actually create a work of art that is unique to this museum.
The artist invites us to experience the distinctive sounds of this Nigerian metropolis and the traders who drive its daily economy.
These markets may not be there forever, so it's also a way of creating works that will last long if the markets cease to exist at some point.
Ogbo considers the rhythmic sound of the market to be like a sculpture. It shapes our experience of a space. It evokes the experience of the women and hawkers that call out against the backdrop of wares, footsteps, and city living.
I want them to be able to step into an open-air market in Lagos. I want them to be transported to Lagos. I want them to feel what it's like to be in these spaces. That's what I hope the museum goers to get out of this.
Speakers are mounted on colorful enamelware trays commonly used for displaying food and goods at stalls in Nigerian markets like Balakan. The trays are also popular with itinerant hawkers who weave through Lagos's busy streets while balancing their wares on their heads. In Market Symphony, Ogbo has combined the ambient sounds of his hometown with electronic compositions to create an immersive experience. Visitors hear the voices of traders, the sounds of bantering, and the overall bustle of Lagos's major markets. The artist described his process.
I wandered around and walked around the markets at certain times of the day. So the whole process started with recordings. We did a lot of recordings around the market. Then we started stitching them up in the studio, listening through and selecting a few seconds here, a minute here, and patching them together to be able to create this ambient of the market. And finally to the installation. It doesn't end in the studio. You also have to make it sound right in whatever space you're putting it into, the volumes, the placement of the speakers. So that's the last bit of it, and that's also a very difficult, a tough process.
Sound is intrinsic and central to how we experience a space, and so this is a way that allows us to sculpt a space using sound.
Carolyn Turner, VOA News.
And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. For more news, tune into VOA's evening radio show, Africa News Tonight, at 1800 UTC. And in the mornings to Daybreak Africa between 0300 and 0600 UTC, Monday through Friday. Thanks for watching, and good night from Washington.
Welcome to the Voice of America's Newswords.
Here's a story that has to do with defects or problems with cars.
Listen for the word that means to take back something. Recall.
They had meetings over this defect. They shared complaints over this defect. Yet there was no investigation by the government and no recall by General Motors until 10 years later.
Recall. It is a word that means to ask people officially to return something.
In our story, there were major problems with some General Motors cars. The man says the U.S. government and the car company took too long to issue a recall, so the cars could be fixed.
Now, when you hear the word recall, your American English will be good enough to know what this news word means.